Hey everybody, welcome to Board Game Heaven. My name is Raymond, and in this video I'll be doing a review of Runika and the Six-Sided Spellbooks by Shannon Kelly, published by Foxtail Games. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, which plays in about 60 to 90 minutes for ages 14 and up. And in this game you will be drafting and placing dice in a grid in your spellbook to form patterns, so-called runes. It's a fun game, but before I start explaining how to play it and share my thoughts, I'd like you all to please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because that really does help the channel quite a lot. And there's also a Patreon if you'd like to support what I do financially, which you can do for just as little as €1 per month. And in return, you'll get your name in the credits of my videos, early access, and also access to some Patreon exclusive videos. All right, let's open up the box and set up a game. To set up a game of Runika and the Six-Sided Spellbooks, give every player one of these spellbooks. There are 4 in the game, and you can let every player pick a character, but they are all the same. Every player also takes one of these elemental rings and places it around this circle in their book with these matching grids in this order. Air is always up at the start. Give every player their matching influence tokens. You can put them on your book. Everyone has influence tokens with their own characters. Take the basic rune card deck, that's the runes with the gray edges, give that a shuffle and place them somewhere within easy reach of all players, and then flip over a number of cards equal to the number of players plus 1. So in a 3-player game, you would flip over 4 cards. Also take the 4 mastery rune cards, those are the ones with the orange corners or gold, and you flip those face up on the table as well. Then take the 4 professor cards and put those open on the table as well. Optionally, you can also take the Luniorn Headmaster mini expansion card and add that to the table as well. I would say if you're an experienced board game player, just add it straight away because it adds extra options to the game. Take the dice bag and all the dice and put them in the dice bag. Give that a good shuffle and keep those nearby as well. Take the merit card deck, give that a good shuffle and place those nearby as well. Take all the single point tokens and the 5-point tokens and keep them nearby. Give every player a player reference card, which has the turn summary on one side and all the faces of the dice on the other side. And if you're playing with less than 4 players, you will have a spare card, so you can give each player their reference card and just keep the dice reference card somewhere nearby. Decide who gets to go first and give that player the initiative token. That's the whole setup. Now you're ready to play the game. When playing your first game of Runika, you can optionally read this guide for your first game, which is a comic book kind of tutorial for your very first game that explains all the rules step by step. But if you're an experienced player, you can also just read the regular rulebook. There are only 8 pages of rules with lots of illustrations, so it's not that difficult, or you can just watch this tutorial. To start the first round, the player with the initiative token draws a number of dice from the bag equal to the number of players times 4, so that every player can draft 4 dice. So let's say we drafted these 12 dice for a 3-player game. Then starting with the player with the initiative token again, you choose one of the dice on the table, and don't worry about their faces, you're going to roll them afterwards anyway, so just pick a color that you want to focus on. So let's say I want to focus on the red dice. I'll just take a red die and put it in my book on the slots for my stored dice. Maybe player 2 also wants a red die. Third player takes a green, so then I'll take another red die. Second player also takes a red. Third player might take a green again. I'll take another red. Second player again, a red. Maybe the third player will take this one. I'll take that one. Second player, third player. And once everybody has drafted their 4 dice, you take those dice and you give them a roll. if you want to re-roll any of your dice, then you need to discard one of your dice to do so. So maybe I want to discard one of my red dice. You just put them back into the bag. And then you can take as many dice as you want. So maybe I just want to re-roll all of them, but you can choose less dice to re-roll. And then you can put them back in your book again. And again, if you still want to re-roll, you sacrifice one of your dice to the bag and re-roll the rest or any dice that you want to. Next, again, the player with the initiative token will start resolving their dice. And to better understand how to resolve these dice, I'll explain what all the faces mean. So on this reference card, you can see what all the dice do and what their faces are. So every die has one element and one color, and they will also have a number of these runes on them which represent their element. And if you roll those are called energy dice. So you can have either air, fire, earth, or water. And then as you notice, water has 3 of those faces, where the others only have 2. These faces can be used to put on your grid in your spellbook, but they can also be used to influence your professors to gain their favor. Next on the dice are these points. So you have these number 1 symbols, and those are simply points, and they are also pushed onto your grid. The last symbol here, that is the rotate symbol, and you can use those to rotate your elemental disc 90 degrees clockwise. And finally, only the fire dice have this flame symbol. And when you resolve a flame symbol die, you have to choose one of 2 things to do. You can either discard one air, earth, or water die from your spell grid, so not a fire die, and then rotate the flame die to its points side and place it where the discarded die was, or discard the flame die and all other fire dice on your spell grid, effectively getting rid of all the red dice. So now in any order I choose, I can resolve my dice. It doesn't have to be from left to right, just in any order that I choose. And you will be pushing these dice onto your spell grid. That means that you place them from one of the 4 sides onto the grid, like as if you were pushing those dice onto the grid. But the red dice are pushed in from the red side, the blue ones from the blue side, the yellow ones from this side, and the green ones from this side. And of course, during the game, that side will change as the disc will rotate around your spellbook. Now, since I rolled one of these water runes, this energy die right here, I can also use it to influence one of my professors and gain their favor. And since I also discarded one die to re-roll the rest, I might do that because the professor of water will let me draw and roll 2 dice. So let's do that. I'll place this die on this professor, and whenever one of these cards has a die on it, that means the next player cannot place a die on that same professor until the end of the round, when all those dice are collected and put back into the bag. So now I will draw and roll 2 additional dice. So I got another energy die, this time the air die, and I got a red rotate die. So now is a good time to think about which of these runes you want to complete first. So let me explain how that works. So for example, this first rune card right here has a 2x2 grid of 4 dice in a purple color, which means if you want to complete this card, you have to make this pattern out of 4 dice of the same color. Any element will do, but it has to be the same color. Another example here is also very simple. This is just 4 dice of the same color in a straight line, and that can be horizontal or vertical because you can rotate all of these rune cards however you want, but you cannot mirror them, which is important, for example, for this figure here that requires 4 yellow dice, the earth dice. And it also doesn't matter which symbol is on those dice because you can push different symbols onto your book. These show the earth symbol, but they don't need to have that symbol showing. So again, this symbol can be rotated, but you cannot mirror it. Now, at any time when you finish one of those patterns on your spellbook, you can claim the matching rune card. So for example, if I were to claim this card, I can take this card. It is worth a number of points. Now this card is worth 0 points because this rune is easy to make. Other runes will be worth a number of points. And once you have this, you will have an ability that you will keep for the rest of the game. Now, this needs to be flipped on your turn. You can only use it on your turn. You flip the card, and then you can draw and roll 2 dice. There are 3 kinds of these abilities on the rune cards. There are continuous abilities, like on these mastery cards, it says here, continuous, and you will have that ability for the rest of the game. There are abilities that you can only use once per round, and I usually rotate my card 90 degrees to indicate that I used it. And like we saw before, there's also the flip on your turn cards that you use on your turn. Then you flip those cards over so you cannot use them anymore for the rest of the game, but you still keep the card and their points. So making patterns to match these runes are pretty simple. You either use any color but make the pattern out of one color, or you make the pattern out of a specific color printed on the card. But there's also the mastery cards, which are a little bit more complex because they not only require more dice of the same color to complete them, but you cannot have dice of that same color in any of the other spots. So the black spots right here, that means you can have any dice there or no dice at all, but not in this case green ones. It has to match this symbol perfectly. So once you've decided which of these cards you're gonna go for first, you can start pushing your dice onto your grid. Or, like I did before, influencing a professor for their favor. Now, what I forgot to say is that every time you put a die on one of the professors to gain their favor, you also put one of your influence tokens on their cards. And at any point during the game, if you have managed to put all of your influence tokens on all 4 different professors, you never put more than 1 of your tokens on any one professor. You only have 4 tokens. So if you have influenced all 4 of them, then you can take back all of your influence tokens, put them back on your book, and you gain one of these cards. These are certificates of merit, and they are worth a number of points, varying from 2, 3, or 4 points. So that's a lot of points to get for your endgame. And also, once the first player is taking their turn, pushing their dice or placing them on professors, the other players can already start thinking about which rune card they want to start forming on their book. But of course, keep in mind you can't execute your plans until the players before you have taken their turn, because they could have placed dice on these professors or later in the game already claim a card that you were going for. So it is important to take turns in order. So right now I have a green rune, a red point, and a red rotate die in my stored die slots there. So I'm thinking about what I want to make. So for example, if I want to make this rune card Empower, I could, for example, take one of my red dice and push it onto my grid from the right side where the red rune currently is. So I can put it on my grid right there. I can do the same with these points. That works as well. So I can push this in from this side, and I already have 2 of these in line. Now I can't push these rotate dice onto my grid. These have to be used, and when you do, you rotate your disc 90 degrees. So it's important to think about which dice to resolve first. So I push these in from the right first. Now I'm going to resolve this die, which means I rotate my disc 90 degrees like that in clockwise direction, like the arrows on your book tell you to, and then that die is discarded back into the bag. My final die is a green die, which I can push onto my grid as well, this time from the green side, which is now also on the right. So I could do this, but that would not be good if I want to make this symbol. But of course, before I have claimed one of those cards, I can always change my mind and think, well, maybe I want to go for this one instead. So I can either just put this green die onto my spellbook and maybe, you know, go for this rune later, or maybe something else will turn up. Maybe I can go for this rune with the green dice, or I could have also placed it onto this professor. That wouldn't help me that much because this one says push one die onto an adjacent space on your grid, which means if I had placed it here, then I can push one of my dice onto an adjacent spot. And it doesn't have to be a free spot. I could do this, for example, or this, but I can also push that die that way, and that would just simply push other dice with it, like that. And if you ever push a die off of your grid, it is simply discarded back into the dice bag. So this may not have helped me that much now, but at least I get to put another influence token on another professor and prevent other players from using that professor on this round. So since we've already seen what these two professors do, let's take a look at the other professors. So the red professor here lets you discard one die from your grid, any die, and you gain 1 point if it was a point die. So if that was the die you discard, you simply take one of these points and add it to your book. And the Professor of Earth lets you rotate your disc to any position, including rotating it 360 to its original position if that is what you want. So after I've taken my turn and used all of my dice, the next players play until everybody has taken their turn. Then you give the initiative token to the next player to the left of you in clockwise order, and then that player repeats the process. Should you decide to also play with the Headmaster Luniorn card, then at the start of the game you take one die of every element and put it underneath the Luniorn card, like so. And then if you wish to use this card, just like with the professors, you can put any die with its elemental face up onto that card. So let's say one of the players during the first round placed a die here, and then they can take any other die from this number of dice. So maybe they needed a yellow element die, so they take this. Then they roll that die and push it onto their grid or use it in another way. Note that you do not place an influence token on Headmaster Luniorn when you influence him, since he does not allow you to claim a merit card. At the end of a round, any dice that are on these professor cards are removed and returned into the bag, except for any dice on the headmaster card. Those are always moved under the card with the other ones, so that on a next turn, players will once again have 4 dice to choose from if they pick the Luniorn card to gain influence. The next player with the initiative token drafts new dice, 4 for each player, and then every player, starting with the player with the initiative token, drafts 1 die until every player has 4 dice again. You roll those dice, and let's just say in the second round, this is what I ended up with. So I want to push 2 more red dice onto my grid to still try and make this rune. I can now do that in a number of ways. I could simply take a rune die and push it in here from the bottom on the red side and push it here, then take this one and push it from the bottom as well. That is certainly an option. I could also have used this earth elemental energy die, put it on Professor Ikamu and rotate my disc to any position. So I could have rotated all the way here and then push those dice from that side, or rotate it all the way here and push them from the right. Now in this example, I could do it in 3 different ways, which is of course very simple, but later on in the game it will become a bit more difficult, so you have to puzzle your way to make your runes. So now I only have 1 die left, which lets me rotate my disc. So I discard that, rotate my disc 90 degrees. So after I've resolved all of my dice, I get to score my runes and possibly gain any merit cards. Now I haven't put any more influence tokens on the other professors, so I'm not getting a merit card right now, but I have made this rune. So when that happens, you take that card and then you discard the dice on your grid matching that rune. So I've matched it this way. So that means I can remove all of these. Any other dice will remain on your book. So I only take these 4 off. And since 2 of these where the points icon right here, I have gained 1 point per face that has these, so that's 2 points. And then I simply keep this card until I use it. This is a flip on your turn card, so I can only use it once per game, and I get 2 points. I put these back into the bag, and that's my turn. At the end of every player's turn, after rolling and resolving your dice in any order you want to resolve them, and then possibly scoring rune or merit dice, there's a cleanup phase. And during the cleanup phase, if there are any spaces in the rune cards that are open, you flip over the next card. Now, should you draw a card that is similar to a card that's already here, you simply stack them on top. So if this card wasn't drawn, but for example I had drawn this card, that's the same as this one. That's also a sweep. I simply put it on here, then draw the next card until I find one that's different. Important to know is that when you claim one of these mastery rune cards, you also only remove the dice, in this case the green dice, that make the rune. All the other dice remain on your book, so you don't need to remove these. And if you claim this, you get this continuous ability. In this case, the air dice may be added from any side. This is basically the same for all of these 4 mastery cards for their own color. And then that player gains that card for the rest of the game. And that card is also worth 4 points that you can see in the corner here. The different elements have different values though. This is 3, 6, and 5 points. But whenever another player completes the same rune that you already had, this mastery card for example, then they still can complete that rune and score the points. Simply remove those dice from their grid, and then instead of taking the card, they simply take 4 victory point tokens, but they do not get the continuous ability from that card. At the end of every round, you check if there is a victory condition, and that happens when any player has 20 or more points. That is including the points tokens, the cards, and the merit cards that you can get, or when either the rune or the merit card deck runs out completely. And if that hasn't happened, again, you pass on the initiative token to the next player and continue playing the round. So if during that round one of the players gains 20 points or one of these 2 stacks of cards runs out, then you also finish the round first and then end the game. Then all the players at the end of that round add up their points from their tokens, their cards, and their merit cards as well. And the player with the most points wins the game. And if there is a tie, then all tied players win the game together. There are also a couple of rules variations. There's one for simultaneous play for a more solitary experience, less player interaction, and then all players take their turns simultaneously. They may only influence each professor once, even one that has been influenced by another player in that round. The initiative token is still used for drafting the dice. Rune cards aren't claimed until the end of the round, and if 2 players claim the same rune card, then both score the card, but neither gets its ability. There is also a variant that plays with secret cards, but with more player conflict. So instead of playing up to 20 points, randomly deal each player 1 basic elemental rune, so that's a basic card with a colored rune pattern. 1 starter rune, and starter runes are cards that have this icon on the bottom right of the card, and also randomly deal them 1 mastery rune. All players keep those 3 cards hidden, and they can only claim a rune that they have been dealt. And when a player manages to claim all 3 cards of their runes, they win the game. And additionally, if you want to have a game with more conflict, you may allow players to use a professor's ability to target not only yourself, but also other players. If you want to speed up the game, you can also use the quicker drafting house rule, where every player simply draws 4 dice from the bag, and then secretly on every odd round, you pass 1 of those dice anti-clockwise to the other players, and if it's on an even round, you pass them clockwise. And if you want a shorter game, you can play up to 15 points instead of 20, and if you want a longer game, you can also play up to 25 or 30 points. Finally, the rulebook also has a single player campaign, which you can play solo, and I will leave that for you to discover on your own. And this campaign uses the back of the professor cards, which all have a different challenge for the player. And that is how you play Runika and the Six-Sided Spellbooks. Let's go to my final thoughts. So my final thoughts on Runika and the Six-Sided Spellbooks by Shannon Kelly. Let me start with the components. The components are really well done. The cardboard is very thick. All the tokens are very thick indeed, thicker than most games that I own. So very good quality, very sturdy. The printing on them is very clear. It's all very colorful. The cards are of a good quality. They're also pretty thick and shiny. They have a glossy finish, so that's really nice. Printing again is very clear on them. I love the dice. We have all of these different colors of dice, 4 different colors, and they're just absolutely beautiful. They're nice and transparent, and they're a bit small, but there's so many of them. There's a bunch here, and there's a bunch still in the bag. You get a lot of dice, and I love just placing them on my book in my grid, and it's just a lot of fun to roll the dice as well. It looks absolutely gorgeous, and yeah, I love that you get not just a rule book, but also a comic book that explains the game in a comic book fashion. So that looks really fun, and it was fun to read as well. And even the box is of a good quality. It's very sturdy. It has a very functional insert that holds everything in its own spots. It's not bigger than it needs to be. So all of that is very well done. The artwork is absolutely amazing. I love the artwork. We have these very nice looking pieces of artwork here on the headmaster card and the professor cards. Those look absolutely stunning and very colorful. There's some information on the back as well. So that looks lovely, and plus the comic book, of course. Most of the game looks like the characters from the comic book, because you have these influence tokens and the tokens on your the character on your board, on your book. And there's some art here on these reference cards as well. That's all done in the comic book style, but all of this looks absolutely beautiful. So the art, excellent as well. I like the theme. It's a bit Harry Potter-like. You've got these children going to a wizardry school, learning runes and spells, and puzzling out what they do with their powers, with these dice that you roll. And I think the theme fits this game very well. But the gameplay is, of course, the most important thing. So what do I like about this game so much? Well, mostly it's a puzzle. I like the fact that you have this big bag of dice, and one player drafts a number of dice equals to 4 times the number of players. So every player can draft 4 dice. So you start drafting, and you're already looking for the colors that you want, because you want to fulfill some kind of rune. Maybe you already have some dice on your grid and you want to continue with that pattern. And some of these cards will have the purplish dice on them, so you can use any one color. So once you start with a color, you have to continue with that color. And of course, other cards in this deck have a certain color already printed on them, so you need to get those. And so once you've started committing to one of these rules, you want to continue with that, but you can also tell what the other players are doing. So you can draft dice that they might want, or just go for your own color. So the drafting process is already pretty fun, and there's some player interaction there. Then you roll the dice, you put them on your storage here, and then you start putting them in your grid. Now you can play this game simultaneously, but of course the first player will have first dibs on placing dice on these professors and possibly the headmaster, if you're including that in your game, which I do recommend just doing straight away, because this is a very versatile card. It basically has the 4 colored dice already with the card at the start of the game. And if you play any color rune on this card, you can pick any other die. So you can exchange colors, for example. Then you roll that dice, add it to your stock, and then use it. So after doing that, after the rolling die, you're puzzling out what to do with those dice. You're thinking of which dice am I going to place first, and from what side do they go? Do I need to rotate the dial so I can push this dice from a different direction onto my grid? And what will happen then if I push these dice? Do I need to have the influence of a headmaster? Do I need to get favor so I can activate that special ability and do something else that I need to do to make it even more optimal? And you're trying to get those runes as fast as possible, because it is a bit of a race to get to those 20 points first, of course. So there's that pressure going on. So you can already think about what you want to do while the first player is taking their turn and possibly next. But the only restriction is, of course, if they happen to put dice on the headmasters or the professors, then you, of course, can't use them anymore in that turn, because there can only be one die on each card. So you might need to adapt your strategy as, you know, the turn progresses. And I love that little puzzle, I really do. So there's not a whole lot of player interaction going on. Like I said, it's just who places dice on these cards. That means you can't if somebody else does. And otherwise it's just puzzling out what to do with your dice. So, but I find that a lot of fun. I do enjoy the puzzle element here. You're trying to optimize your turn as much as possible to get those cards as fast as you can. Maybe even try to go for one of these masteries, the golden rune cards. That will get you a permanent skill that you can use. And they all have, you know, the color that you complete. Those dice may be added from any side, so you can ignore the dial. So that is a big boon as well. And of course, if you have influenced all four of the professors, you have gained their favor, then you have placed all of your character tokens on all four, then you can take them back and get one of these favor cards, and those are also points. So you can get 2, 3, or 4 points that will speed up the process greatly. So all of that combined makes for a very fun and a very thinky, puzzly game, and I love that about this game. The replayability is also, I think, pretty good. Now, the game doesn't outstay its welcome. One game is usually a good. That is a very satisfying game. I usually, when I played this, I was happy after one game. I didn't need to play it again. Playing it a second time is fun, but it can take up to an hour to play, especially if you're with 4 players. It can take a bit longer because people are thinking about their turns and thinking about how to optimize their dice placement, of course. So that might take a while, but once you're used to the game, it does go faster. And it's basically as replayable for as long as you enjoy the gameplay, because the gameplay will be different every time. You get a different challenge and a different puzzle every turn, literally, because every turn you draft new dice, you roll them, the outcome is going to be different every time. So you have to do that mental puzzle every time. And as long as you enjoy doing that, that's how long you can replay this game. So for me, that's gonna probably be a very long time, definitely keeping this in my collection. Then there is the language dependency. Most of the game is language independent because you're just moving dice around and rolling dice, and none of that has any language on it. These rune cards have a little bit of language on them, so there are some texts on these. It's just a little ability that you gain once you completed these cards, these runes, and you can use them either continuous or once per round, or you flip them on your turn and then you can't use them anymore. But so those you need to be able to read. And then there's, of course, just a little bit of text on these professor cards and the headmaster cards that tell you what their special ability is once you activate them. It's not a whole lot of text, but it is there, so that is something you need to take into account. But I think you can easily write some of these things down if you need to. All in all, I really enjoy this game. It looks amazing, it plays amazing. I think it's a lot of fun, and I would also like to thank Shannon for sending me a copy of this game to review. I had a lot of fun with this, I really enjoyed it, and thank you for letting me review the game. I can certainly recommend it. I hope you enjoyed this video, because that was it. I'm giving it 2 thumbs up. If you enjoyed the video, please also give it a thumbs up as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, of course, if you haven't already. And also please check out my Patreon page by clicking the link in the description below or the icon at the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.